And now we're going to jump up north to our good friend and former Congressman, CPA, and author of Unaccountable Congress, founder of truthingovernment.org. Make that one of your favorites, Joe DioGuardi. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Boy,
Good morning.
That was a mouthful. So, Joe, I'm looking at one of the articles that you sent me. That's funny. One of the articles that you sent me, it says this. The CBO director's comment is, we need to inject some honest accounting and real transparency into how we spend our tax dollars.
Is he listening to me? Is it possible? That's what I've been saying for years.
I mean, you think we should, with $18 trillion in the hole, or $85 trillion, as you're saying, and over $200 trillion worth of long-term liabilities, you think we should inject some honest accounting and transparency? You think they're getting it?
You know, it's amazing. We got to get this message out because it all gets down to basic 2 and 2 equals 4. That message is not understood in Washington. And we're not playing by the same rules that we're imposing on the private sector. We have a double standard. Hey, look at that State of the Union speech and look at the article that appeared in a Washington Post by Ruth Marcus. You know what the title was? The Debt, Mission Unaccomplished.
Yeah.
Hey, what did he say about the debt? All Obama talked about was how great things were and that the deficit's coming down. But guess what? The debt is going up. Why doesn't anybody want to talk about the debt that we're putting on the next generation? Because they want you to think that no matter what we spend, we can borrow.
That's
and
right.
someone will pay for it, but it's not going to be us.
Now you didn't mention, and I thought you would right there at that moment, years ago, when you held up and said, here's the most expensive credit card in America, in the world, actually.
In the world, yes.
Yeah.
And that was my, I used to get really kidded around when I'd go in and have a sandwich off the House floor. They'd come up to me and say, Joe, you keep repeating that. And, it seems like people are starting to think there's a problem. I used to remember Guy Molinari from Staten Island said, Joe, that's a great thing you put up there. That's a good way to describe what's going on down here. That was 1985, 86, 87, and 88. Hey, it's 30 years later.
The
problem is worse.
But Joe, they don't want to go out on the campaign trail and tell people what they're not going to get because we need to start being responsible. They want to go out on the campaign trail, and we just saw it. Again, we're coming back. We're being repetitive here, but look at the outcome of the primary election, and a couple weeks later, the Republicans craft a bill to add $1.2 trillion to the deficit, right?
Yeah, this is the problem. But, there's a reason why you would get a reaction from a congressman that I just gave you. That's what they're used to.
Right.
Either they were in Washington or they came from some, state assembly or state senate, and kind of they were weaned on the idea that if we don't have the money, we can always borrow it, and always look at that option first because, God forbid, we raise taxes, we may lose our seat. So I come to Congress after 22 years, not being in any assembly or state senate. I come on the scene, as a CPA, and I'm looking at what's going on. And the first thought that comes to me is, hey, this is how people go bankrupt. These are how the students, they were convinced to get credit cards up their credit line, and then they had to go declare bankruptcy later on because they couldn't afford it or their parents had to bail them out. Well, that's the first thing that came to my mind, credit card mentality, and it's still going on.
Yeah, Joe, this week, I'm glad you brought that up right there. Not only what we see, you say, you and I both, this phrase 2 + 2 doesn't equal 10. Well, actually, we have to change it. 2 + 2 doesn't equal 30 is what the federal government's trying to do.
Right.
But look at where they are. But now let's look at some of the numbers that came out this week. We already know that it's about $85,000 or $80,000 per person. That means if a child's born today in America, that's their part of the debt. Not the
long. That's the debt.
Okay.
That's the debt that they're telling you is on a cash basis. That's not including unfunded liabilities, unrecorded, unfunded entitlements. You name it.
So put that on there, and then you find out that kids coming out of college have about $36,000 on their back, right? And then
they can't get rid of it in bankruptcy if they tried, because that was put on there by the banks. So You're talking about over $1 trillion in student debt. You're absolutely right.
And then you go And we find out that now, and I knew it, I said it before it happened, others said it, that Obamacare would be the biggest boondoggle in public policy in the history of the United States. Now we're finding out that every person will have a number on their back of $50,000, the cost of insuring each person. Okay, so theirs on their back. I mean, Joe, how do you dig out of these holes? Forget the federal government, which I think we live in fantasy land. But you're right. How does the individual think that this is not going to change their lifestyle?
How can we get honesty in government? That's why I started Truth in Government 25 years ago, so we know the truth. I wrote an article last year when Obamacare came out. It was put in the Hill and in roll call that if you measured the cost like we measured the future costs and the current costs of Social Security and Medicare, you're talking about another $17 trillion that accountants would put on your balance sheet,
right,
on your books today, if we were using the right system of accounting called generally accepted accounting principles. No one even mentioned that number. I was the only one. Now you see it. I sent you an article today. They're now thinking, wow, over the long term, this is going to cost us at least $50,000 a person. Hey, when are we going to start looking at all these numbers and adding them up and realize we are Greece? You know, Greece, look at Greece right now. Mm-hmm. They're holding Germany hostage now that they may break the European Union because they've got now a new party that took over who doesn't want to recognize their obligations or debts. What are we going to do? We can't do things like that. So we're in a real hole until we educate the people. The real power in America, they're the people. But if they don't have the information and they don't know what's coming, how do they act? How can they make decisions? Now, you could say that about Congress. Why are they making decisions without this information? Because they want to look the other way.
Right. Well, look, we're now heading, of course, like lightning speed towards 2016. And you know, I mean, look, we know who the Democrats are, and it's very interesting that as I mentioned this morning, that the Socialist Party as well as the American Communist Party both have said they will continue to support the Democrat Party and work closely with them. Well, no big surprise there. So we know that side of the debate. But on our side, you're going to have people, forget that. Let's correct that. You have political handlers like Karl Rove that are telling candidates, don't talk about all these details. Don't pull America into the weeds about such things. They don't understand it. Stay up here. Don't educate them. So then what? So what do we get? So at the end of the day, we're not being educated. But I think the largest damage or the biggest damage that's being done is we pick people for high office in government that don't understand any of this and don't care about any of this.
Absolutely. It's the election process that's not serving America well. And by the way, another article I sent you right behind the one that says bankrupting America is Rand Paul reignites audit the Fed. Don't forget his father started that.
Right.
Ron Paul, and I came right out and did a rally at City Hall in Manhattan when he couldn't show up. And I said, not only should we audit the Fed, but let's get independent auditors the way it just happened. You saw that little piece
right.
I did after I went out to the Reagan Library, and I was looking at the Secretary of the Army, Secretary of the Air Force, and the CFO from the Department of Defense. And I said, when are you guys going to have an audit so we can justify giving the Defense Department more money? So the point is, and they did 2 weeks later appoint, it was Ernst & Young. So we do need to bring in auditors, but let's bring in not only the Government Accounting Office, which is another federal agency, let's bring in the outside auditors like Lockheed used to have, your old company,
right.
and the way all these big companies have to have today. Otherwise, you wouldn't know what the truth is. We need a referee that's independent, someone without a conflict of interest. That's what accountants are. That's who accountants are, especially the big accounting firms.
I want to ask you the second part of this article. And I agree with you. I support Rand Paul's reigniting, it says, the audit the Fed fight. Now, I'm confused. 4 years ago or whatever, when the Republicans came to power under Boehner, he was forced, and he didn't want to do it. He made Ron Paul the head of the committee that was going to audit the Fed.
Right.
But it never happened. Why?
And a lot of other things didn't happen. Well, because there's going to be, pain for some of these decisions. And the pain is that people will find out that the debt is so much more, because now people are saying that that big black box called the Fed may have over $5 trillion in debt, and some of it or much of it could be these securities that we told them they had to buy in order to bail us out, from that recession. Mm-hmm. So people are saying, well, let's not open that black box yet, not on our watch.
Right.
Let's keep seeing it. Maybe it's going to come out later on, and maybe at some point, we'd want to know. But this is not the time, because we're here now, and we have to keep our majority. I want that big office in the corner because I'm now, the chairman of the campaign. So it gets back down to Washington politics as usual.
Thank you, Joe, for being with us. As always, telling it like it is. My friend, you stay safe and stay warm up there, okay?
Thank you.
We'll talk to you next week. Joe DioGuardi, don't forget to make truthingovernment.org one of your favorites and follow Joe's writings and research.